Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see everybody out on this wonderful Lord's Day. If you have your Old Testaments handy, you can be turning to Judges chapter 17 this morning. Judges chapter 17. That's where we ended up last week, and we are going to, Lord willing, finish up Judges this morning. Get into another episode of the Israelites' history. But so far we have seen a people that has been given everything that they need to prosper, right? I mean, God has been with them. God has told them what they needed to do, how they needed to do it. He has been very clear that as long as they obey the covenant that He laid out for them, then they would prosper. That they would grow strong and they would be a nation above all the other nations, that He would be their God. And things would go great for them. But He warned them. He said, when you go and take over this land, I want you to make sure that you get rid of anything that would cause you to walk away from me or turn your head from me. That meant idols, that meant intermarrying, that meant not going in, totally annihilating all the people from that certain land that was allotted to them. So they were given fair warning that as long as they obeyed God's will, then God would be with them and they would be a great nation. Have you ever seen somebody that's been given everything? It looks like that every opportunity has been given to them. They have talent, they have wisdom, they have money, and it just seems like they throw it away. And they wind up being in trouble. They wind up being broke. They wind up being in a position where they're not prospering. We've seen that, haven't we? People that have been given every opportunity to do great things, and they choose to go the other way. Well, that's kind of what we've been dealing with the Israelite nation, isn't it? Over and over again, God has given them the opportunity to rise above. But because they're humans, they make bad decisions. But God is long-suffering, isn't He? Over and over again, He forgives them. He gives them the opportunity to do what's necessary. And that's what we've seen so far with the judges. We've seen the cycle. They trust in God. They fall away from God. They fall into captivity. They finally come to their senses and they cry to God, and God sends them a deliverer. And for a number of years, they're faithful, and they fall back into the cycle again. Well, the last time we ended, we saw Samson. Samson was the last judge that we looked at. And from this point on, we're not going to see any more judges. We're just going to see the attitude or the environment of the Israelites during the time of judges. And it's not good. Because most of the time of the judges, if you look at verse 6 of chapter 17, this describes the characteristics of those individuals during the time when Israel was going through this. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Is that a good recipe for success? Everybody do what's right in your own eyes. Has that been God's direction from the very beginning to tell His people, you just do what you feel is right? That's never been God's direction, has it? In fact, a good parent never says to a child that is learning patience, to a child that is learning obedience, to a child that is learning right from wrong, or what's going to harm them or what's not going to harm them. A good parent never says, go out into the world where there's a hot stove, where there's a car that's running 70 miles an hour, where there's a swimming pool that's 9 foot deep. Go out into the world, in the backyard, and do what you feel's right. Is that good parenting? Absolutely not. A good parent warns a child, directs a child, teaches a child. Now, has God done that with the Israelites? Has He taught them? Has He guided them? Has He warned them? Is He trying to develop them into a nation that He wants? Of course. But they're ignoring all that. They're ignoring that because they're going out in the world and they're letting the world dictate how they should feel. Because the world's guidance is different than God's guidance. Would you all agree with that? The world's guidance says, in fact, do what you want to do. Do what's right in your own eyes. In fact, we live in that kind of world today, don't we? The world hasn't changed much since we're looking at the world in Israel's time now. Satan is still out there. And he's trying to get us to view things from our own eyes. Because what does that do to man when we can say, I'm going to do what I want to do? What guides us when we have that kind of attitude? Flesh? Pride? What are some other things maybe? Selfishness? Yeah. These individuals have been given every opportunity, but over and over again they choose to go against God's will. Now, from chapter 17 to the end of Judges, which we're going to go through pretty rapidly today, because we're not really talking about any judges. We're just talking about the atmosphere that was going on during the time of Judges. And you'll be surprised of the things that are happening during these last few chapters of Judges. In chapter 17, you may see the entitled Micah and the Levite. Micah was an individual from Ephraim that was a real class individual. The first thing that we see about this, and he was a son, that he stole 1,100 pieces of silver from his mama. So that's class right there, right? A son stealing from his mother. Now, as we go through chapter 17 and chapter 18, I want us to look at how many times these individuals go against the law of Moses. Because that's the standard of what God says is right. That's the standard for these Israelites to obey God's will so that they'll be prosperous. So, does the law of Moses have anything in it about stealing? Of course. Yeah. The first commandments. You remember the first 10 commandments? That was a big one. And then later on, he would be more specific about what happened if you stole an ox or so forth. So he went in great detail about the commandment not to steal. So, a son stealing from his mother, is that a big deal? That's a big deal, right? That shows us how deep this sin is in the children of Israel. That do what? Oh, that's right. Thank you, Eddie. Yeah, there's 2 so far. He's not honoring his mother and father. So, his mother apparently decides that she's going to put a curse on this individual that stole. Doesn't know it's a son yet, but she's going to curse. Now, does that go against the law of Moses? Cursing someone? What does that represent? Cursing someone. What do you have to have on your side so that you can bring an evil curse on somebody? Hatred? Satan? Because you got 2 entities in the world that are fighting against you. You got good or bad. So the cursing of somebody means that you're relying on the good or the bad. The bad. Because the curse represents something bad happening to an individual. So, again, we see the characteristics of the Israelites, of this mother. The son who was a stealer from his mother. And now we see the mother who relied on dark beliefs so that she would be able to pronounce a curse on whoever stole this. And she must have been prominent in cursing individuals because the son heard about the curse and it scared him. Not the fact that he had broken the covenant of Moses and that got his conscience working, thinking, I need to say I'm sorry because I broke the word of the covenant. But he's afraid of his mother's curse. So now the son is showing his belief. he believes in this curse. So the belief that his mother can bring a curse against him, decides to give the money back. Is that a pretty good idea? Now, why is he giving the money back? He's afraid of the curse. Nothing is said about the law of Moses. Nothing is said about getting right with God again. Nothing is said in honoring his mother again. He's afraid of the curse. Now, if you go a little bit further down, the mother is excited by the son's attitude. She's so excited she comes together and gives the money back, and she makes engraved images and metal images, and she gives it to her son, and then she goes and adds more. In verse 4, she took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into engraved images and to metal image. And it was in the house of Micah. And the man of Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod. All right, now, this is the second ephod that's been made beside the original one. You remember that? Who made the second ephod? Gideon. Remember that? Gideon made the ephod because the people wanted to make Gideon king. So he said, well, I don't want to be king, but if you want something to look at, if you want something to be encouraged by, let me make you an ephod. And we know what happened because of that. Israel suffered because of that. So this is the third ephod that's being made in the house of Israel. The ephod was the garment that the high priest wore. Now, who had the only right to wear the ephod? The priest, the Levites, yes. He's the only one. And that represented something. That's why God had it made like He had it made, because it represented something precious. And anybody that wore that, they were representing God. So they took that out of context. So now there's a third ephod being made with also engraved images and metal images in the house of Micah. And then verse 6 again. This describes everything that we have just seen. Yes, Delmer? Oh, well, definitely not. Yeah. Yeah. Well, how many times do people use the Lord's name to make oaths that are evil? That's what's going on here. She's just using the name of the Lord to do something that is evil. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a true characteristic of us as human beings, no doubt about it. But now we see why verse 6 was given. Verse 6 is almost an excuse, isn't it? The writer is kind of giving an excuse. And we're going to see that a number of times, actually, this phrase. In those days, Israel did what they wanted to do in their own eyes. And we see that. How many laws were broken in these first 5 verses? More than one. And we've already discussed those. The times that they had the opportunity to do what was right, but they chose to go against the law of Moses. And because of that, this is a description. They did what they thought was right in their own eyes. Now, we're going to step away from Micah just for a minute, but we were introduced to Micah and his attitude and his home because it's going to play a part here in a moment. Verse 7, now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judea, of a family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. The man departed from the town of Bethlehem of Judah to sojourn where he could find a place. And as he sojourned, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. Now, a couple of things there. Again, we're still under the context. Everybody did what they wanted to do in their own eyes. Where is a Levite supposed to be? With the Levites. Going back to Leviticus, God instructed where the Leviticus people should live, what they should do. Now, they were not allotted a land of their own. We know that. But they were given refuge cities to live in. And then they would take care of the tabernacle. And we've spent a lot of time talking about their responsibilities. And they had big responsibilities. So, for this Levite to have left his own people, that's troubling. And now what is he looking for? He's looking for something to do, to find a place. So he comes to Micah's house. So now you have a Levite that has left his home, is looking for his own place, and he comes to Micah's house that is full of corruption and sin. What do you think is going to happen? And Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" And he said to him, "I am a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to sojourn where I can find a place." And Micah said to him, "Stay with me and be a father and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year and a suit of clothes and your living." All right, so another red flag. How were the Levites supposed to live? Can you remember that? Were they to go out and do jobs and earn money? Absolutely. Were they taken care of beautifully too, right? Everything that the Israelites would give, an offering or whatever, they would get a certain part of that. They were getting silver, they were getting gold, they were getting a lot of meat, because a lot of the meat that was sacrificed would be given to the Levites. After they cooked it or they would offer it, it was given to the Levites. So, the law of Moses was very specific. The Levites would not do any labor except in the tabernacle. So, how did this Levite get to the point where he left that, and now he's looking to make a living by being a priest of all things? Again, who paid the priest? How did the priest make a living? God supplied it through the Levites, right? Through the other individuals. So, the Levite comes to this Micah and this home that is full of sin, full of bad characteristics. And now a Levite who thinks he can come and be a priest. Now, who is the only one that can be a priest? Can any Levite be a priest? No. You have to be the lineage of who? Aaron, right. We don't have any description of that. He doesn't show, hey, my forefathers were from Aaron. We don't see any of that. All we see is this priest did as he saw fit in his own eyes. So that goes with everything that we've looked at so far, right? Verse 6. Micah did what he thought was right in his own eyes. Micah's mama did what she saw fit in her own eyes. Now this Levite man is doing what she sees fit in her own eyes. So that's the characteristic of what's going on in the children of Israel at this moment. So, Micah says, "Stay with me." This is verse 10. "Come and stay with me. I'll pay you 10 pieces of silver a year, and you can be my priest." And the Levite was excited about that, so he became the priest. And look at verse 12. "And Micah ordained the Levite." Micah really thought he could do anything that he thought in his own mind, right? Isn't that taking a big leap of saying, I can anoint you? I'm a big enough individual that I can harness the power of God, that I can anoint somebody that can be God's spokesperson. He had reached the limit of his own mind, hadn't he? And Micah ordained the Levite. And the young man became his priest and was in the house of Micah. Now this is what Micah's mindset was. Because he was so convinced that he was the one that could make the decision, that he was the one that was going to be the one that was going to give him prosperity. Look what he says. And Micah said, now I know the Lord will prosper me, because I have a Levite as a priest. He has gone off the deep end, hasn't he? Because he's used his own wisdom, he thinks. Everybody did what he thought was right in his own eyes. Again, is that a good recipe for success? Absolutely not. That's why the children of Israel are being split. They're breaking apart because everybody's doing what they want to do. Now, coming to our life today, do we have a threat of being in that same scenario? Of course. Satan wants us to have that pride. Satan wants us to have, maybe, just as was mentioned, well, it's my family, so I'm going to give an excuse for what I'm doing, so I won't be like everybody else, or whatever the case may be. So, Micah is to the point now where he feels that God is with him. Has he deceived himself? He's got and also a house of a priest that is illegitimate. But, look, does he think that he's okay? He thinks, oh, I've got it made now. I am going to prosper because I've got the Lord on my side. Delmer? He had to. Yeah. He knew the stories. He knew what a priest represented. He knew what the power of God could do to his home because he'd seen it. But in order to receive that power, in order to see that strength, a person had to obey the covenant. Right? Completely. And we see because of that they did not. So, Micah's house, chapter 17, we see Micah's house is a house of shambles, right? No doubt about it. It's a house of shambles, so anybody that would rely on the house of Micah is going to go down the wrong path. We've seen that. Now, chapter 18, we're going to step again away from Micah, but we're still not done yet. Micah's house is going to be influenced. Now we're going to see the tribe of Dan. The tribe of Dan, if you remember the tribe of Dan, or the Danites, you might see the Danites in your reading. The tribe of Dan, at the point when we saw Joshua take over, you'll remember that when judges came in and when the end of Joshua, Joshua said, everybody has not received their inheritance yet. They had done a lot. A lot of the people had received their inheritance, but there were a few that had not. And at the beginning of Judges, you'll remember, there was a list of individuals who did not drive out their inhabitants. There was a long list, and you go back to Judges chapter 1 and see that list. Individuals who did not drive out the inheritance. So we know what that happened. Well, Dan is part of that. They had not received their inheritance yet. So they're wandering around. Now, remember who's in charge of this land during this time. Who did we leave in charge of the land in Samson? The Philistines. Remember that? The Philistines were still giving the people a hard time. So Dan, the tribe of Dan, was wandering around trying to find some place that they could make their home, because they hadn't received their promised home yet. So that's where we're at. That's the mindset of what's going on. Dan is trying to find somebody. In those days, there was no king of Israel. In those days, the tribe of the people of Dan was seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in. For until then, no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So again, that shows us the time frame of what's going on. They're looking for an inheritance. Now, again, what was the mindset of everybody? Go back to verse 9, chapter 17. What did the people think? There was no king, so everybody did what they thought was right in their own mind. And that's exactly the mindset in chapter 18. In fact, we even see that. They had not received anyone, they had not received a home, so they were going to do what was right in their own mind. We're going to see in this story that Dan did not request help from the Lord. Micah did not request help from the Lord. Micah's mother did not request help from the Lord. The Levite did not request help from the Lord. They only did what they thought was right in their own mind. And that got him into trouble. Now the Danites, they're going to do the same thing. They're looking for a home. So in their own minds, they decide, let's scan for a place. So that's what they're doing. So they come to the hill country of Ephraim. Now you remember who lived in Ephraim? Micah. So as they look for a home, they come by Micah's house. And as they go through Micah's house, look at verse 3. When they were by Micah's house, which was an outstanding house, right? The children of the Danites are going to be blessed by meeting Micah and his family, right? No way. They're not going to be blessed at all because it's a house of sin. But they come to there. And in their own minds, they see that Micah has a priest because they recognize the voice. They know this man. They recognize the voice of the young Levite, and they turned aside and said to him, "Who brought you here that you are doing in this place? What is your business here?" And he said to them, "This is how Micah dealt with me. He has hired me, and I have become his priest. And he said to me, 'Inquire of God, please, that you may know whether the journey or which we are setting out will succeed.' And the priest said to them, 'Go in peace. The journey on which you go is under the eye of the Lord.'" Wow. Train wreck after train wreck, right? First of all, they're trying to find a place on their own merits. They're not inquiring of the Lord. They come again to a sinful home and they see a priest that has been not indicted, but has been found guilty because of his own actions. And they see this priest, by the own priest's admission, I was hired by Micah. Now, should that thrown up a red flag to any child of Israel? Priests aren't hired. Priests are ordained by God himself. So that should have put a red flag. But what did it do to the Danites? Hey, told him what they wanted to hear, absolutely. Told him what they wanted to hear. And he says here, you're going to do what's right. Yeah. They did what was right in their own eyes. This must be a priest. He's a Levite. We recognize him as a Levite. So they have determined that peace will be found in their own eyes. Now, is that a scary situation? When Satan can convince us that whatever we decide in our own eyes is right. And we can go to bed and we can sleep soundly. Because I've decided what's right is what's right. That's scary, isn't it? Delmer? Yeah, he had a hold on them, no doubt about it. So, the Danites, trying to find a home, come across Micah's home. They see this so-called priest, and they try to persuade him to come over to them. And we're not going to read that, but if you have time, do that. Read that. And they do. They persuade him to come over to them. And he travels with them for a while, and Micah hears about it. So what is this outstanding man, Micah, going to do? Oh, go ahead, you can have my priest. What do you think Micah does? He goes after him. And they subdue him. The Danites finally come to them, and they find out that, in fact, they take 600 men to try to take him away from him. They come, Micah takes his household, they come, and with armed men, this is verse 17, and the priest goes back to his home. That's the last part of chapter 18. Oh, yeah. They took everything that Micah had. The golden images, the ephod, the priest, all that stuff that they thought was right. So, Micah's family was bad, but the Danites, were they any better? No, they were confused too. So, what chapters 17 and 18 have done for us, they show us the need that Israel needed to get their attitude changed. They were so far from God. Even though God had been with them over and over and over and over and over again. So the people needed a king, right? Desperately, the people needed a king. All right, now chapter 19. Again, I'm going to try to finish, so we're going to go through this pretty rapidly. 19 is just another evidence of how far these people were. Chapter 19, if you'll see the entitlement here, a Levite and his concubine. This is, we don't know, it's probably not the same Levite we're talking about earlier, but because we don't have that description, but just the fact that it's a Levite. A Levite is supposed to be held to higher standards, right? It's supposed to be, because they're the ones that stand in between Israelite and God. Whether it's the priest or whether it's the Levites that are building the tabernacle, sustaining the fire, keeping things ready so that they can atone for their sins. So they're kind of set up a little bit higher standard. So when a Levite and a concubine, this is evidence that the Levites have even wandered away from God. And what happens in chapter 19, just to paraphrase it in, bring it in closer, and you can read it for yourselves if you want to. This Levite has a concubine, this concubine who is, by the way, a legal wife. This isn't a prostitute, this is a legal wife, but a concubine would have a relationship like a slave, not like a wife. So they could come in, get a concubine, but they would be under the same relationship as a slave and an owner. So this Levite has a concubine. The concubine does not remain faithful to him. So he's upset with the concubine, as you can imagine. He goes on a trip. He makes the concubine sleep outside. The people of Gideon, this is in 19, go and rape this prostitute, or not prostitute. They treat her as a prostitute. And they rape her to death. And the Levite comes out in the morning, finds this person dead. Even though he was trying to get rid of her, blames the Gideonites for this murder, which they did kill this concubine. But he cuts this concubine in 12 pieces for the precise purpose of getting the Israelites mad and bringing them to war. And that's what happens. They come and they bring war with the Gideon. And chapter 20, we see this war is with the tribe of Benjamin. and the Benjaminites come together and they cause war. So this war was brought on because of a, in fact, it's almost a 3-day war if you look at verse 20 chapter of that chapter. The 3-day war of the Benjamites. There are only 600 men that survived from Benjamin. Benjamin is again an individual who was going to be allotted a home in the land of promise, who had not received that yet. So they go and they totally annihilate all the women, all of the children, and there's only 600 fighting men left. So the Benjamites are in danger of not being able to carry out their lineage, right? If there's only 600 men left of the Benjamites, how are they going to carry on their lineage? They won't. So now they go to the children of Israel and they plead with the children of Israel, we need to find some people that we can overtake, that we can kill their men and take their women so that we can have a home. And that's what chapter 20 is about. They go and they deceive these individuals. They go during the time when it was least expected. Looking at, look at verse 20 and 21. And the men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin, and the men of Israel drew up the battle lines against them at Gibeah. And the people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed. They were destroyed on that day, 22,000 men of the Israelites. But the people, the men of Israel, took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed the first on the day. And the people of Israel went out and swept over the Lord until the evening, and they inquired of the Lord, shall we again draw near and fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, go up against them. So this is the episode of them fighting. Go down to verse 20. Yeah, let's go ahead and jump above that. I want to, because we're almost out of time. Chapter 21. Let's just look at chapter 21. This is the final chapter that I want to look at. After the battle of the Benjamites, they had got to 600 people. They come and they give their request that we need wives. Go down to verse 7. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them any of our daughters for wives? So before and during the battle with the Benjamites, they knew that there could be a chance that we could totally annihilate any chance for the Benjamites to grow as a people. So they made an oath. They're not going to take wives from our clan. So that was an oath they made. If we totally go and kill all the people and there's a chance they may not be able to grow, then they're not going to get any of our wives. So that's what they say. Are they still concerned about the Benjamites being totally annihilated? Yes. They don't want them to be totally annihilated. Even though they were in war against them, they didn't want God's people and their inheritance to be taken away. Verse 9, and they said that one of the tribes of Israel did not come up to the land, to the Lord, to Mizpah. And behold, no one had come to the camp of Jerigillah and assembly, for the people were mustered before not one of the inhabitants was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there and commanded them, go and strike down the inhabitants with the edge of the sword, so the women and the little ones, that this is what they shall do. Every male and every woman that was slain with a male shall become devoted to destruction. And they found among the inhabitants 400 virgins who had not known a man by lying with them, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. So, this was their idea. Instead of giving them wives from our own tribes, daughters from our own families, let's go and totally annihilate this land. Now, did God tell them to do that? No. Again, what was the mindset of everybody in that day and time? Everybody did what they thought was right in their own mind. So they go and, first of all, they made an oath that was foolish. If they would have given them, if they were really concerned about them, they would have given them their daughters so that they could grow as a family. But they chose, because of their own mind, they chose to do this. So they go and kill a whole town, take 400 virgins, but that was still not enough. How many fighting men were left? 600. So there's only 400 wives found. So 200 are still available. So now if you look at, go down to verse 16. Then the elders of the congregation, what shall we do for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? And they said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin. So were the children of Israel concerned about Benjamin surviving? They were. But they were going about it the wrong way. That a tribe not be blotted out of Israel. Yet we cannot give them wives of our daughters, for the people of Israel had sworn, cursed be he who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they made an oath. And was an oath important back then? It was very important. The law of Moses said, if you make an oath, you carry it out, even if it leads to your death. So an oath was important. So they made this foolish oath. We can't give them wives of our own clan, so we'll do some detestable things in order to get wives. So they said, behold, there is the yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up to Bethel, to Shechem, and south of Lebanon. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in ambush in the vineyards and watch. And the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dancers, then come out of the vineyards and snatch each man's wife from the daughters of Shiloh and go to the land of Benjamin. All right, so what was their bright idea in their own minds? To get these 200 more wives for the Benjamins? Let's go and commit kidnapping. The first time was let's go and kill a whole town. Let's commit murder. God didn't ordain it. He didn't tell them to do it. It was in their own mind that they did it. And now, let's go and kidnap these individuals. Again, that's where we're in Judges. So, the children of Israel are riding high right now, right? Man, they're doing great things. Man, they are lowest of lows right now, aren't they? They need help. Now, next week, we've seen the bad part of Israel. Next week, we're going to get in what is described one of the greatest love stories in the Old Testament. You know what book that is? That's Ruth. Ruth is in the midst of these people that have the mindset of doing what they thought was right in their own minds. Now we're going to see a positive note with Ruth and Naomi. A positive note who did not think that. They didn't think, well, I'm going to do what's right in my own eyes. They trusted in what God told them to do. We're going to see that. So we end on a note of depression, of sadness, of looks like there's no hope. But next week we're going to start with a beautiful story of hope. And that's where we'll start next week with Ruth. Let's bow for a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time that you've given us to see your love and your compassion and your long-suffering for individuals that sometimes turn away from you. We ask that you be with us as we have the opportunity also to trust in you and not rely on our own thinking. Just be with us as we continue our services this morning. We love you so much. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.